So it is very, very important that this gets out. It is very, very important that people actually know that Hamas not only committed their crimes, but that they boast of their crimes.
On democracies and death cults, Israel, Hamas and the future of the West. Douglas Murray claims that the West's very future is at stake in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It draws on on-the-ground reporting in the wake of the October 7th massacre and argues that Western sympathy for Palestinians killed by Israel in Gaza tilts into open support for Islamic terrorism and undermines our own values. I'm pleased to say Douglas Murray joins me now. Douglas, welcome to Times Radio.
Very good to be with you, Hugo.
Thanks very much for being here. You went to Israel in the immediate aftermath of October the 7th, and you write in detail about the horrifying events of that day, much of it painstakingly pieced together afterwards, and the profound and awful impact it had on that entire nation. You also write that the world's sympathy didn't last the day. What do you mean by that? Because I'm sure I heard a lot of sympathy.
There was some sympathy, but we also know that on the 7th, anti-Israel groups in the UK and others already put in their requests for an anti-Israel protest the next day, on the 8th. I was in New York on October 7th, and the next day, on the 8th, I went down to Times Square in New York, where there was a huge protest of people celebrating the massacres as they were still going on. We've seen similar protests for the last 18 months. Of course, there's a difference between people who believe that they are simply on the side of the Palestinians having another state in the region and people who just openly support Hamas. But we've been very bad, I think, at identifying the latter. And we've been equally bad, if not worse, at identifying where the first becomes the second.
Do you agree with people like Suella Braverman who describe those marches as hate marches?
Oh, yeah, of course they were hate marches.
Even although they included a sizable number of people, who knows whether it was a majority or not, who themselves didn't believe that they were expressing hate?
Sure. Lots of people don't realize that they're supporting death, and they're supporting a death cult, and they're celebrating the massacres. Lots of people are ignorant. Lots of people are ignorant. They don't know what they're talking about. They literally don't know what they're talking about. And some of them walk through the streets glorifying Hamas and shouting for jihad, and others couldn't point to the region on a map if you gave them a head torch and a week with a map.
You write also, you watched those marches in the US and European cities, and you thought, and this is the quote, what has this got to do with you? Why does this one conflict matter so much? Of all the conflicts going on around in the world, from Syria to Myanmar, from Sudan to Ukraine, what's this one got to do with you? But it also meant something to you as well, because you went there straight away and you see this fight as being the defining fight that basically the West is having in defense of freedom at the moment, which is the crux of the book. Tell us about that argument.
Well, I think, that observation, which came to me when, over the last 18 months when I wasn't in Israel, and Gaza and Lebanon, I was around the rest of the world. And whenever I was in places like Vancouver in Canada or Sydney or Melbourne in Australia, and I saw these huge anti-Israel protests on the street, I was just like, what's it got to do with you? I mean, you're in snowy Vancouver, an hour away from the skiing, and you're obsessing about this? Now, some people might say, well, it's such an important cause to make sure that the Palestinian people get another state that or we so dislike the actions of the IDF and the IAF, and we're just simply, and the question I have is, but why? Why, of all the things that go on in the world, why does this get people's ire up? And the truth is, as you point out, you may say that it's a flip side of why people like me care about this as well, which is that it is true that the people who have been most vocal in their hatred of Israel from October the 7th hate Israel first and every other Western democracy next. The group at Columbia University, which has become rather famous in recent weeks in particular, calls in its statement of principles for the, quote, complete destruction of Western civilization. I'll do that again. The complete destruction of Western civilization. So
Which group is this?
That's the Columbia students group who are protesting and camping in the main square at Columbia University for most of the year after the 7th of October. These are the people who were chasing Jewish students across campus, shouting, "Go back to Poland," or saying that these people should be the next victims of Hamas. They've decided that for them, the existence of one Jewish state in the world is intolerable. And they focused on it because they believe that if you could annihilate Israel, then you can then get on to the order of business of everyone else. And I think in one way, they're onto something. They do. They believe that the existence of the Jewish people in a Jewish state is intolerable to them. I believe that sentiment should be very, very loudly called out for the evil that it is.
So, speaking as a Jew who lives in the West, I do look at those protests and think, what's it got to do with you? What's it got to do with you? I must admit, I find myself asking that question about you as well. And I'll explain why, because what you're describing sometimes seems to me, you're describing your fight with people like the Columbia University protesters. And I wonder if there's an extent...
I don't have a fight with them. I mean, they were very much in the back of my mind as I was in Israel, Gaza.
If you'll allow me, I wonder to what extent the reality of what's on the ground in Israel, and I'm sure you'll explain this, relates really to that fight. Hamas is an Islamist organization, but its precursors in the Palestinian, in terrorism or militancy or independence, whatever we wish to call it, depending on one's view, was secular. Yaser Arafat's, PLO were secular. And I wonder if we define this fight as merely one against Islamism, whether there's a danger that we're assuming it has similarities with the fight in the West against Islamist terror that simply aren't there.
No, I explain in close detail in the book, as you know, what I think the similarities are. I think it's too generous of you to the late Yaser Arafat to describe him as a secularist.
Well, he thought he was secular.
Not much. He founded his organization, what's more, the PLO, in 1964, when they were fighting for the liberation of the occupied territories, as you know, but listeners may not. In 1964, Israel was not in Gaza, the Golan, most of the West Bank, and so on. So what Yaser Arafat meant, and his colleagues in the PLO meant, was the liberation of everything that is Israel.
Yes.
The annihilation of the state of Israel. That was always their aim.
Yes.
And that has been the aim of all their successor organizations ever since. And it doesn't matter really on that level whether it's Fatah, PLO, or Hamas. As for the sort of music of your question, I believe that the people who loathe Israel the most can be very easily identified as loathing everyone else in the West next. And let me just very quickly lay out a simple observation that I think might exemplify this. If you go to any, and of course the book is mainly about actually what happened on the ground, but if you look at the reaction to it in countries like this one, in cities like this one, just consider the fact that if you go to one of the few pro-Israel protests that happen in America or Britain, peopled by Christians, Jews, and others, you will see that they fly the flag of Israel and they fly the flag of the United Kingdom. And at the end of these always rather moving and always peaceful protests, they will finish by singing in London, Hatikva and God Save the King. Mm-hmm. You will notice that the anti-Israel protests have never finished with the singing of God Save the King. Why might that be? Why in America, when the protests against Israel happen, does nobody fly the flag of the United States of America, the country they're in? Why do they never sing the Star-Spangled Banner? Why, in fact, in protests I saw in D.C. when I was there last summer, why do they seek the anti-Israel protests? Why do they seek the American flag, tear it down from every mast they can find, and then burn it in the street? I don't need to make this connection. They've made this connection. And it is a great burden and curse in a way of Israel that it should find itself the country that these people hate most.
Let's talk a bit about the evil of Hamas as an organization. And you write in the book very movingly. I mean, these are stories that by now we've heard, but about tales of what happened on October the 7th, how horrific it was. I don't want to go into too much detail on the radio. It's intensely distressing for anyone who's seen the pictures, heard the reportage, and you cover all that very, very movingly. You wrote in 2023 in the Jewish Chronicle in a column attacking me, as it happens.
I'd forgotten I did a drive-by against you, Hugo.
No, it's quite all right. I'm sure I've done them too. You wrote in that column that Hamas were worse than the Nazis. Nazis, because you argued that average members of the SS were at least sad about their
I didn't
work.
say they were worse.
You literally said they were worse.
What I quoted was my late friend George Weidenfeld, who, having fled the Nazis in 1919 in Vienna and made his life in this country, said to me, to the historian Andrew Roberts and others who've also put it on the record, that it was his observation in late life that perhaps there was an anti-Semitism even worse than the Nazis. And that made many of us gasp. But what he meant was, and what I meant was, that although there were many Nazis, members of the SS and others who gloried in their work, that the level of anti-Semitic evil that Hamas engages in has some other level to it for one reason in particular, which is the deep, deep pride they have in their work. I quote near the beginning of the book, I quote the phone call that some people will know of a young Hamas terrorist in one of the kibbutzim in the south of Israel, calls back to his family in Gaza, says, Father, your son has killed 10 Jews with his own hands. Father, your son has killed Jews. Switch to WhatsApp so I can show you. Get mother on the phone. Get my brother. I mean, all the family come on.
This is obviously horrific.
No,
stuff,
no. But my point is that what people have to recognize, and remember, we live in a country where 1 in 4 Muslims believes there were any murders or rapes on October the 7th. So it is very, very important that this gets out. It is very, very important that people actually know that Hamas not only committed their crimes, but that they boast of their crimes. They broadcast their crimes. They GoPro'd their crimes. They WhatsApped their crimes. They wanted the world to see the glory in death that they feel, the pride they feel in the murder specifically of Jews. Now, we don't need to get into a game of who was the worst Nazi, who was the worst anti-Semite.
Well, this is your argument, not my argument.
No, it's not an argument. It's a point that I think you and others should contend with, which is that this group, Hamas, and the others that they go along with...
The glorification is markedly different from the cover-up that the Nazis engaged in.
Exactly. Yeah. There was... I mean, the Nazis tried to cover up their crimes. It doesn't no vindication of Nazi atrocities. It's simply to say, look, can you imagine if in the 1940s, German news media had been proudly broadcasting footage from Bergen-Belsen around the world?
Understood.
It's just something to think about.
You write in the book, it seems to me that the right of Israel to fight and win such a war is vital, not just for the sake of that country, but also for Britain, America, Britain, America, and other Western countries will be able to fight such a war if or when the time comes.
Yes.
If or when the time comes. What time do you mean? What does that time look like to you? What's the fear here? Are you talking about an Islamist uprising in Britain or America, or what are you talking about?
No, no one can see the future. What I observed is that the fight that the IDF and others have been engaged in for the last 18 months is markedly similar to the fight, for instance, which this country and France and our allies fought against ISIS, for instance, on a much smaller scale. And when, after the Bataclan atrocity in Paris and the other massacres that happened in 2015 in France, President Hollande, no right-winger he, and the British and other governments agreed to bomb ISIS from the air in the area they were controlling in Syria and Iraq. And we used our Kurdish friends, very brave Kurdish fighters, to do all of the heavy fighting on the ground. That saw not the complete annihilation of ISIS, but it basically defanged them to the extent they could not carry out attacks of the kind they were carrying out in France and other European countries back then. And by the way, nobody in the West, nobody on any campuses really cared, quite rightly, about what it took to destroy ISIS. We just wanted to destroy them.
But
so we have seen a bit of that ourselves.
But you don't see an existential conflict like that happening at home.
Who knows?
Well,
my point.
Who knows? That's
I'm not going to.
I mean,
it's more important that I get the present right than the future, and it's also easier.
Right.
But the thing I would say on this is just remember that when we lost hundreds of Parisians in a night, we did not have to deal with a world saying you don't have the right to destroy ISIS unless you have no civilian casualties in the process of doing so. We did not have to face endless pundits who knew nothing about on the ground the reality of the war, telling the French and British that, you know, had we not thought about collateral damage, or maybe ISIS can't be destroyed, maybe if we kill members of ISIS, we'll just make more ISIS, and so on. These are all the arguments that are only used against Israel when it's fighting against Hamas. And by the way,
but perhaps they're used there and not here because they apply there and not here. I mean, Israel does create more members of Hamas by killing members of Hamas.
Really?
Of course it does.
That's your view.
People are
People
are radicalized.
No, that's your view. That's not, of course.
You think it's incorrect?
I think somebody like Yahya Sinwar was a very unusual figure. I don't believe you keep creating Sinwars. I'll tell you what, but on the bigger point, when people claim that if Israel responds militarily in Gaza in any way, it will simply continue to create Hamas.
Well, there's a difference between in any way and in this way. I think that you're eliding something quite important.
Okay, well, I think that the Israeli Defense Forces, from my observation, have done the job they've had to do in Gaza of trying to get back the 250 stolen Israelis who were kidnapped from their homes and from the Nova Music Festival, and to kill or capture the leadership of Hamas. I think they have done it in the most expert way possible. Doesn't mean there haven't been mistakes made along the way. Of course, that's the nature of warfare. But they have done it in the most expert way possible. If anyone else in this studio or anywhere else in London or around the world has a plan for how you get back 250 hostages being held in underground tunnels, underneath hospitals, mosques, and in civilian houses, and how you would capture or kill the leadership of the terrorist group who did that, please send me an email of your battle plan and I will send it on to anyone in Jerusalem I can.
Understood.
But just quickly, on the other point, of the, as it were, if you try to kill the terrorists or to destroy the terrorists, you only create more terrorists. Throughout history, there have been times when you could have claimed this, and it is not the case. And it cannot be the case in this situation if the following thing happens. Just very quickly.
I'm sorry, but that's not the argument I presented you with. It's not if you kill the terrorists. It's if you cause collateral damage in killing the terrorists, which is quite different.
But the Allies managed to destroy the dreams of Imperial Japan against the most unbelievably brainwashed people.
Yes.
And the dream that the God Emperor would ever give in and admit defeat was impossible to concede. Were there collateral damages among the Japanese people? Yeah, I think so. There's some rather famous examples. But we destroyed, the Allies destroyed that another death cult in Imperial Japanese ideas. There is no reason why Hamas should be regarded as such a brilliant and appealing group that they too cannot be utterly defeated at some point.
Okay, well, I'm definitely going to come back to that. There are two more questions I'd really like to ask you. Sure. I know we're a little bit pushed for time. You clearly know Palestinians. You write in the book that you actually lived in Ramallah 10 years ago, which I did not know this. Yeah. You also visit an Israeli prison for captured Hamas fighters in the book. You say you spent hours there, but you don't quote anybody there. You don't paraphrase anybody there. You say, although I saw people I knew from the atrocity videos, there was nothing to learn from them. Why are Palestinian voices so absent from this book? So many have died. Why are they not in this book about the war in their region?
Well, they are in the book, and I describe.
They're not first person in the book. They're not present in the book. They're discussed in the book.
Quite a few who are, and they include people like the very brave. You might call him a Palestinian. Some people might call him a Palestinian, but one of the great heroes of the day, who I quote, a great Arab Muslim Israeli doctor whose story I wanted to bring out. So I do, but I just would add. Because I sense that this critique might come. When I'm in Ukraine, which I was again the other week with Ukrainian armed forces, I'm never asked why I don't hop over the front line and go and speak with Vladimir. Hang on, let me finish.
You're in a prison with Hamas fighters there.
Hang on, let me finish.
Yeah.
I'm not asked why I don't hop over the kilometre of no man's land and speak to Vladimir Putin's soldiers.
I wasn't asking why you didn't go to Gaza.
I'm just saying that in reporting a war in general of this kind, it is... it's as tough to get Hamas to host you in their homes as it is to get Vladimir Putin to do so.
That's not what I asked you at all. I mean, you say you go into this prison full of Hamas fighters. You say you spend hours
I'm very
there.
careful about what I say about that for very sensitive reasons.
You say, although I saw people I knew from the atrocity videos, there was nothing to learn from them. How is there nothing to learn? This is the whole thing. These are the genocidal people who are conducting. How can there be nothing to learn from them?
Because they'd already told me and everyone everything by what they did. They'd already told us everything.
So dialogue was impossible. There was not 2 words to learn from them to put in a quote and put in the book.
As I said, there are very sensitive reasons why I can't directly quote in the book the people who carried out the atrocities and were captured.
You identify one of them. You say who he is.
You've just got to accept the fact that I've written around that problem
understand.
because, for reasons of sensitivity, I can't go into the.
I understand. Look, I think probably finally you wrote this book before Donald Trump started talking about the Gaza Riviera, before he started talking about the absolute. One assumes he says temporary, some people say temporary, ethnic cleansing of Gaza. What do you think of those policies? And if that's not the end game that you approve of in this region, what is the end game you approve of in this region? I know that's a huge question, I appreciate.
The president did not suggest ethnic cleansing.
He did.
He did not suggest ethnic cleansing.
He said the population of Gaza should be shipped out.
Yeah, he did not suggest ethnic cleansing. He said that anyone who wants to get out should be able to get out.
He didn't just say that.
Yes, he did.
And that's not correct.
Yes, he did. He and his administration have made it clear that of all the people in war zones around the world, whether it's Ukraine, Myanmar, whether it's Syria, the appalling conflict there in the last decade, people have been able to move. They've been able to get out of the zone of war.
Absolutely.
Okay? In Gaza, because of the international obsession with keeping the citizens of Gaza in Gaza and the fact that the Egyptians don't want to get their former protectorate back or anything like that, the people of Gaza, as I have seen up close, have been having to go back and forth at the advice of the IDF from the areas where the IDF needs to engage Hamas, and they say, everyone who isn't Hamas, go.
Yeah.
We need to fight here. So why should this population have to keep going from Gaza City to Rafah to Khan Yunis or thing? Why not allow anyone who wants to leave the zone of war to leave the zone of war, is what Donald Trump suggested. Has he put a major 15-step plan in place? Not yet. But I believe that has been a very important paradigm shift. And if I could quickly say so, this is the reason why. Until President Trump said that, nobody had any idea of what to do to resolve this other than whenever the last hostages are back in Israel, dead or alive, hopefully mainly alive, and whenever the leadership of Hamas is utterly destroyed, and it's almost there, what is everyone else's plan for Gaza? The plan is effectively the European plan, the British plan, every other know-nothing's plan, which is, why don't we pour billions of dollars back into the Gaza,
and wait for
allow international organizations like UNRWA to misgovern it again, bring up another generation of Gazans to hate their neighbors and believe the greatest good in life is to annihilate the Jewish state. And then at some point in the coming years, Hamas or a similar group will do the same thing again, and then the IDF will have to go in again. That is basically the only plan that was on the table until President Trump said maybe the people who want to leave should be able to leave.
I think it's disingenuous to say that all that Donald Trump has suggested that maybe the people who want to leave should leave.
But one other
what is? I have to ask you.
No, but it's really important because there is much mishearing about this. Just one other thing, because you asked me my view.
Yes.
I said since the beginning of this conflict, this cannot be the umpteenth Gaza war. It has to be the last. It can't be the third Lebanon war. It should be the last Lebanon war. For that to happen, the international community, and not just Israel alone, has to permit the destruction of Hamas and the destruction of Hezbollah and the throttling by financial means, hopefully successfully, of the Iranian revolutionary government, which has been colonizing the Middle East in our lifetimes, which has colonized Iraq, colonized Syria, colonized Lebanon, colonized Yemen, and has colonized Gaza. If that were to happen, then there is a possibility at a future date to create the kind of state again, because the Gazans were given a state in 2005, another chance to do this and to reboot, and this time maybe to resist the urge that so many of us do resist, to fire rockets at our neighbors. And in the meantime, final short point, in the meantime, there is a price to pay in all wars to continually trying to annihilate your neighbor and losing.
Yes,
and that includes losing land. There is no God-given right that the people of Gaza should stay in every inch of Gaza if they keep launching and losing wars against their neighbor. Any other state in history, any other group in history, when you start and lose wars repeatedly, you pay a price. Okay. And Hamas has to pay the price.
So look, we began by talking about the problem was Hamas. Now the cost is to be paid by the people of Gaza. I think there's a problem there.
No, in that case I have to answer that, because they voted in Hamas when they were given the chance, and for 18 years Hamas governed the Gaza. I would wish that the citizens of Gaza had risen up at some point in the last 18 years, but they didn't. And there is another principle in war, which is if you are governed by such a group, if you vote in a death cult, knowing its aims, knowing its beliefs, and they govern you for 18 years, sorry, the line between the citizens of Gaza and Hamas becomes at best very blurry.
Okay,
I mean, I dream like you do that there is a peaceful Jeffersonian subsection of the Gazan population which can't wait to get roaring, but you show me them.
I understand. Look, finally, and absolutely finally, we've talked at the beginning of this interview about the terrible slaughter inflicted upon Israelis on October the 7th. You look at Gaza now, people exist among rubble, among the corpses of their dead relatives. Tens of thousands of people have died. It has to be currently one of the most horrific places on earth to be. Do you see any cost, any damage that Israel could inflict upon Gaza, any cost that would be paid by the Gazan people because of what happened? That is too much. Is there anything that would be too much? Is there anything that Israel could do where you'd be, this is too far? If so, where do we hit that point for you?
Well, if the IDF was, for instance, deliberately massacring civilians, that would obviously be a war crime and would not be correct. But it hasn't happened.
That's the line.
Whose?
I'm asking you. That's your line.
Well, if Israel were committing war crime after war crime, then that would be a line, but it's not.
I mean, what? 2% of the population are dead?
No, I don't believe that figure. First of all, the death tolls, of course, as you know, and we can get into it, but it might not be worth it. The death toll figures are all given to us by Hamas, by the Hamas ministries in Gaza.
They may be incorrect, but they're still going to be big.
They're wildly inflated, and of course, they never include their brave terrorist fighters who die in their much sought cause of death. But there's no point in having the numbers discussion. I concede that a large number of Palestinians have been killed in Gaza during this conflict. Military experts reckon that it's probably one of the lowest civilian to terrorist ratios in any modern conflict, possibly in any conflict.
Yes.
And that is because of remarkable work by the young men and women of the IDF. And I have been with them enough and seen them enough to know they do not go into these war zones. They do not go into Gaza in order to rape or kill or any of the other smears that have been made against the IDF in the last 18 months, the citizens of Gaza. I have seen with my own eyes people who have lost limbs in the IDF. I've been to the funerals of men who have died in Gaza because they were booby-trapped by Hamas, because they were fired at by Hamas from mosques, because they were killed as they were trying to save civilian life. And the hundreds and hundreds of young men, mainly of the IDF, who have lost their lives in the last 18 months, have lost their lives because of the manner of war they've been fighting, which is one that not only tries to minimize casualties on their own side, but to minimize casualties on the opposition's side. If the IAF or IDF had sought to commit a genocide in Gaza, it could have done, and it didn't, and it hasn't. It is fighting a bloody, dangerous, booby-trapped war against a death cult that wants to annihilate the state of Israel. And I think that of all of the smears that I've heard in the world outside Israel in the last 18 months, very few come alongside that one in deliberately misunderstanding
the accusation of genocide.
War aims of the Israeli government and the extraordinary heroism of the civilian army, which has found itself having to fight a neighbor when not one of those young officers, soldiers, cadets would not have dreamed of being able to live in peace with their fellow citizens in the Gaza. Not one of the people who was dancing at the Re'im Music Festival was not dreaming of the day they could dance with their Palestinian brothers. Not one person in the kibbutz in the south of Israel was not dreaming of the day they could live in peace with their Gazan neighbors. And not one man or woman fighting in Gaza for the IDF in the last 18 months has not dreamed of the day when they don't have to speak about Gaza again because they live in peace with them.
Douglas Murray, thank you very much. The book is On Democracies, Death and Death Cults, Israel, Hamas, and the Future of the West. And I think we had a good taste of it. Douglas, thank you.
A pleasure.